The autumn wind whistled through the narrow streets of Durango as Luke Carter stepped off the eastbound train, his polished badge catching the late afternoon sun. The young sheriff's Boston-tailored suit and leather satchel marked him as an outsider, but his keen green eyes absorbed every detail of the mountain mining town with the sharp attention of a seasoned lawman. 3 months of correspondence with the town council had painted a grim picture, yet nothing could have prepared him for the raw desperation etched into the weathered faces that watched him from beneath wide-brimmed hats. Nathan Lopez, the deputy who'd met him at the station, was a study in contrasts. Mexican cavalry boots paired with an immaculate Eastern waistcoat, and a voice that carried both frontier drawl and educated precision. "Sheriff's office is this way," he said, gesturing down the muddy main street. "Though I should warn you, what happened to Sheriff Allen wasn't natural, despite what the council claims. Man doesn't just vanish into thin air after 20 years of service." The sheriff's office was a stark wooden building wedged between the assayer's office and a Chinese laundry. Inside, Luke found organized chaos. Wanted posters arranged with mathematical precision, but bullet holes in the walls telling stories of violence. A tin star lay discarded on the desk, its previous owner's dried blood still crusted around the pin. Nathan watched as Luke picked it up, turning it over in his hands. That belonged to Isaac Allen. Found it in the alley behind the Golden Palace Saloon 3 months ago. Nothing else. Eleanor Nelson, the banker's daughter, had been the first to disappear. Her father, Joshua Nelson, kept her photograph prominently displayed in the bank's window. A beautiful young woman with intelligent eyes and a determined set to her jaw. She'd been investigating land deed irregularities when she vanished, leaving behind a leather-bound ledger filled with careful notes about railroad manifests and property transfers that didn't add up. The ledger itself had disappeared the same night as Sheriff Allen. The Golden Palace dominated the north end of town, its gaudy facade a stark contrast to the utilitarian mining operations that carved into the mountainside behind it. Caleb Hall, the saloon's owner, had built his empire on opium and flesh, but his connections to the railroad made him untouchable. Luke watched from across the street as elegantly dressed women ushered miners inside, while Chinese workers slipped through a side entrance with suspicious wooden crates. "Town council's in Hall's pocket," Nathan explained, as they shared coffee in the sheriff's office that evening. "Man's got a private army of hired guns, connections all the way to Tucson. Even the telegraph operator reports to him. But it's the missing people that don't sit right. Eleanor Nelson wasn't the only one. 3 Chinese girls from his brothel vanished last spring. Then, Caroline Lopez, my sister, who worked as a maid in his mansion, she noticed something she shouldn't have." Luke spent that first night reviewing Sheriff Allen's case files, piecing together a pattern that stretched back years. Land deeds changing hands just before railroad announcements, miners dying in suspicious accidents after filing claims, and a series of letters between Hall and railroad executives that hinted at something larger than mere corruption. But it was a crumpled note in Eleanor's handwriting that caught his attention. "Meeting Charlotte at the old Josephine mine tonight. She says she has proof." The Josephine mine lay abandoned 2 miles north of town. Its entrance partially collapsed after a suspicious explosion the previous winter. Luke found Nathan studying an old survey map, his finger tracing the maze of tunnels that honeycombed the mountain. "There's something else," the deputy said quietly. "Before he disappeared, Isaac told me he'd found a second set of books in Hall's office. Shipping manifest for something that wasn't opium. Said it had to do with the Chinese workers and the old mine." Rose Carter arrived unannounced that evening. Luke's sister and a Pinkerton detective who'd been working railway cases out of Wichita. She brought with her a portfolio of evidence suggesting the Golden Palace was part of a larger network stretching from Pueblo to the coast. "It's not just opium," she explained, spreading photographs across the desk. "They're moving people. Chinese workers, women, anyone who won't be missed. But the question is, where are they going? And what happened to those who started asking questions?" As night fell over Durango, Luke stood at his office window, watching lanterns move like fireflies up the mountain toward the Josephine mine. The case was bigger than a missing sheriff or a banker's daughter. It was a web of corruption and human trafficking that threatened to destroy everything it touched. But in the darkness of his office, studying the evidence scattered across his desk, Luke Carter began to formulate a plan that would shake the foundations of Caleb Hall's empire and expose the terrible truth hidden in the mountain's depths. The pre-dawn air bit cold as Luke saddled his horse, methodically checking the Winchester secured to his saddle. He'd spent the night mapping the mountain trails leading to the Josephine mine, cross-referencing them with Caroline's photographs of wagons moving under cover of darkness. The railway detective had departed for Pueblo on the midnight train, but not before sharing one final piece of information. A coded ledger found in the previous sheriff's desk, its pages filled with dates and Chinese characters. Nathan, the young telegraph operator who'd been helping Luke piece together the disappearances, emerged from his office with a fresh dispatch. Message from Wichita, Sheriff. They found 3 more bodies along the rail line, all Chinese workers who'd been reported missing from the Tucson yards. His hands trembled slightly as he passed over the yellow paper, the weight of what they were uncovering evident in his eyes. The sun was climbing over the eastern peaks when Luke spotted the first signs of surveillance. 2 riders on the ridge above town, watching his movements. Caleb Hall's men were getting nervous, and with good reason. Luke had spent his first week in Red Rock building a careful facade of incompetence, playing the role of an overwhelmed Easterner. But now it was time to show his hand. Inside the Golden Palace, Eleanor, one of Rose's girls who'd been helping Luke gather intelligence, slipped him a folded note as she delivered his morning coffee. The banker's daughter, Charlotte, had been seen meeting with Joshua, Caleb's enforcer, the night before she vanished. More importantly, she'd been carrying a leather portfolio stolen from her father's office, one containing land deeds and railway contracts. Luke studied the mountain through his office window, remembering Isaac's words about the old mining tunnels. The grizzled prospector had mapped them all, claiming they connected in ways that didn't appear on any official surveys. Them Chinese workers, he'd said, they ain't just digging for gold. They're building something else up there, something big enough to hide an army. The pieces were starting to align. The railways pushed through the territory, the missing workers, the sudden influx of opium. It all centered on the Josephine mine. But the operation was too vast for Caleb Hall to be running alone. Someone with more power, more connections, was pulling the strings. Luke suspected the answer lay in those encoded ledger pages, written in the hand of a sheriff who'd gotten too close to the truth. As morning turned to afternoon, Luke met secretly with Rose in the back room of her boarding house. The madam had been in Red Rock longer than anyone, watching the town change as the railway crept closer. Charlotte wasn't the first to disappear, she whispered, pouring them both a measure of whiskey. There were others, anyone who asked too many questions about the land deals or the mine. But they took special care with her, made sure people remembered seeing her leave town. They wanted us to believe she ran. Luke's fingers traced the map spread across Rose's table, following the maze of tunnels beneath the mountain. Tomorrow night, a special train would arrive from Pueblo, officially carrying mining equipment, but Luke knew better. Whatever operation Caleb Hall was running through those tunnels, it was about to expand. And somewhere in that underground labyrinth, Luke suspected he'd find not only the truth about Charlotte's disappearance, but also the fate of a sheriff who'd dared to investigate it. The sun was setting when Luke finished his preparations, carefully loading extra ammunition and supplies into his saddlebags. He'd sent Nathan to Durango with sealed letters, insurance in case things went wrong. Tomorrow, he would begin his climb to the Josephine mine, following the trail of disappeared souls into the mountain's dark heart. But tonight, watching the lanterns wind their way up the shadowy slopes, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what awaited him. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about exposing a cancer that had taken root in the very foundations of the frontier itself. As Luke made his final checks of his equipment in the fading light, a soft knock at his office door made him pause. It was Eleanor, the schoolteacher who'd been Charlotte's closest friend before her disappearance. Her normally composed features were drawn with worry as she stepped inside, clutching a leather-bound journal to her chest. "I found this hidden behind Charlotte's desk at the schoolhouse," she whispered, glancing nervously at the windows. "I've been afraid to bring it forward, but you need to see what she wrote about the railroad dealings, about Isaac Morton's involvement with those shipments coming through from Pueblo." Luke carefully took the journal, its pages dog-eared and stained with what looked like coal dust. As he thumbed through Charlotte's neat handwriting, his jaw tightened. She'd documented dates, amounts, names, a meticulous record of bribes and threatened landowners. But most disturbing were her notes about the Josephine mine itself, with its maze of tunnels that seemed to extend far beyond any legitimate mining operation. Sheriff Luke Carter wiped the sweat from his brow as he studied the crumpled papers scattered across his desk. 3 weeks in Red Rock had taught him more about corruption than 5 years with Boston's finest. The banker's daughter, Eleanor Nelson, had vanished after documenting a complex web of fraud involving the Western Pacific Railroad and several prominent citizens. Her final notes, hidden in a hollow book and delivered anonymously to his office, painted a disturbing picture of the town's underbelly. Through the grimy window, he watched Joshua Lopez's men escort another wagon of mining supplies to the saloon. Luke knew better. Those crates contained raw opium from across the Pacific, not pickaxes and pans. Lopez controlled everything in Red Rock, from the brothel run by the enigmatic Madame Charlotte Hall to the network of caves beneath the mining operation where strange lights were often seen late at night. The previous sheriff, Nathan Allen, had gotten too close to something in those caves. His badge was found at the bottom of an abandoned mine shaft, along with a blood-stained journal containing cryptic references to the ceremony and ancient guardians. Luke's deputy, Isaac Carter, no relation, insisted the natives had warned of evil spirits in the mountains long before the miners arrived. But Luke suspected a far more earthly explanation. Caroline Lopez, Joshua's wife, had been making discreet visits to Luke's office, always after sunset. She spoke of her husband's increasing paranoia, the strange symbols he'd begun carving into the walls of their bedroom, and the weekly meetings with men who arrived on the midnight train from Durango. Tonight, she'd promised to bring proof of the connection between Eleanor's disappearance and the railroad's land grab scheme. The sound of horses drew Luke to the window again. Caleb Hall, Charlotte's brother and the town's undertaker, was leading his wagon toward the cemetery, the third burial this week. All miners who'd reportedly died in accidents. Luke had examined the bodies himself and found strange puncture marks on their necks, unlike any mining injury he'd ever seen. The mortician's books showed an alarming pattern. Every victim had worked in the deepest section of the mine. Rose Carter, the schoolteacher who'd helped Luke decipher Eleanor's notes, believed she'd found a pattern in the railroad's land purchases. They formed a perfect pentagram when mapped, with Red Rock at its center. The surrounding properties had been bought through shell companies, all traced back to a mysterious corporation in Pueblo with ties to both Lopez and the railroad's board of directors. As dusk approached, Luke received an urgent telegram from his contact in Wichita. The message confirmed his worst fears. Similar patterns of disappearances and land grabs had occurred in 5 other mining towns along the railroad's expansion route. Each town had experienced a surge in opium trade, followed by reports of strange lights in the mines, before falling silent. Red Rock was next. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed was almost too fantastic to believe. Eleanor's final notes suggested the railroad wasn't just expanding west, it was following a specific path, one marked centuries ago by Spanish explorers searching for something far more valuable than gold. The caves beneath Red Rock held a secret that powerful men would kill to protect. A knock at the door interrupted Luke's thoughts. Caroline Lopez stood in the doorway, her face pale with fear. "They know," she whispered, pressing a leather-bound journal into his hands. "Joshua's men are coming." Eleanor found the truth. It's not about the railroad at all. The mines, the opium, the disappearances, they're all connected to something ancient, something they found beneath the mountain. You have to stop them before... A gunshot echoed through the street, and Caroline crumpled to the floor. Luke drew his revolver and ducked behind his desk as bullets splintered the office windows. In the growing darkness, he could make out figures moving between the buildings, converging on his position. The journal in his hands held answers, but first he had to survive the night. As he checked his ammunition, a strange humming began to emanate from the direction of the mines, and an eerie green glow illuminated the mountain's silhouette against the desert sky. Josephine Allen, Nathan's widow and the town's telegraph operator, burst through the back door. "The lines are dead," she gasped. "All of them. And I just saw Charlotte Hall leading a group of men toward the mine entrance. They were carrying Eleanor Nelson, and she was still alive." Luke realized with growing dread that whatever ceremony Lopez had planned for tonight, it was already beginning. The true purpose of Red Rock's mining operation was about to be revealed, and he was running out of time to stop it. Luke checked his revolver one final time before turning to Josephine. "I need you to ride to Durango and alert Marshal Caleb Parker. Whatever's happening in those mines goes beyond local corruption." He handed her Nathan's badge, knowing it would prove her credibility. "Show him this and tell him about the green light. He'll understand. As Josephine slipped out the back door toward the stables, Luke could hear the rhythmic chanting growing louder from the direction of the mountain. The journal's weathered pages revealed what Nathan had discovered before his death. Detailed sketches of ancient petroglyphs found deep in the mine shafts, along with translations suggesting an occult connection between the local tribes and something they'd feared, something they'd sealed away centuries ago. Charlotte Hall's grandfather had stumbled upon it while surveying for the railroad, and the opium operation was just a cover for whatever ritual they were preparing. Luke moved silently through the shadows between buildings, using the techniques he'd learned tracking smugglers in Boston's Harbor District. The familiar tang of gunpowder mixed with an acrid chemical smell that grew stronger as he approached the mine entrance. Two of Lopez's men stood guard, their faces illuminated by the sickly green glow emanating from deep within the tunnel. Behind them, Luke could make out elaborate symbols painted in phosphorescent powder across the rock face. The sound of horses approaching from the south made the guards turn. Joshua Reed, the banker whose daughter's murder had started this investigation, rode at the head of a group of men from the Cattlemen's Association. Luke recognized Isaac Turner among them, the shopkeeper who'd helped him piece together the connection between Charlotte Hall's family and the ancient tribal lands. This was his chance. While the guards were distracted, he slipped into the mine. The tunnel descended sharply, newer support beams giving way to much older construction. The walls were covered in carvings that matched Nathan's sketches, but seeing them in person, bathed in that otherworldly light, made Luke's skin crawl. He could hear Eleanor's voice now, weak but defiant, echoing along with the chanting. The chamber ahead opened into a vast cavern, and what Luke saw there made him question everything he thought he knew about the world. Charlotte Hall stood upon a raised stone platform, surrounded by robed figures. Eleanor was bound to an altar, the stolen bank documents scattered around her like some perverse offering. But it was the thing moving in the shadows behind them. Something vast and ancient that seemed to shift between forms, that froze Luke's blood. The creature the tribes had imprisoned was real, and Charlotte meant to use it to secure not just Red Rock, but territory reaching from Tucson to Pueblo. Rose Martinez, the saloon girl who'd first tipped Luke off about the missing girls, appeared silently beside him in the tunnel. "I've been tracking them for months," she whispered. "They take the ones who discover too much, use them to feed it. The thing gives them power, but the price." She shuddered. Nathan found out too late. "But I know how to stop it. The tribes left a failsafe, encoded in the petroglyphs. We just need to reach those symbols on the far wall." Luke heard shooting outside, Joshua's men engaging Lopez's guards. The distraction had worked, but they didn't understand the true threat. The chanting reached a fever pitch as Charlotte raised an ornate dagger, its blade glowing with the same sickly light that filled the cavern. Luke had seconds to make his move, to prevent whatever dark power they were about to unleash upon the territory. The fate of more than just Red Rock hung in the balance, and the young sheriff from Boston was the only thing standing between an ancient evil and its freedom. Luke lunged forward through the flickering torchlight, his boots scraping against ancient stone, as he raced to reach Charlotte before she could complete the ritual. The air grew thick with an oily, metallic taste that made his teeth ache. Behind him, Rose's footsteps echoed in perfect sync with his own as they navigated the twisting passage, their shadows dancing grotesquely on the rough-hewn walls. The cavern opened before them into a vast chamber where crystalline formations caught and refracted the otherworldly glow. Luke recognized faces in the crowd, prominent citizens of Red Rock he'd seen at town meetings, miners who'd claimed to be simple working men, and even Isaac Turner, the railroad magnate who'd arrived from Durango last month, claiming to survey new rail lines. They all wore dark robes now, their faces transformed by the strange light into masks of reverence and fear. Charlotte's voice rose above the chanting, speaking words in a language that seemed to slice through Luke's mind like shards of broken glass. The dagger in her hands pulsed with each syllable, and the sheriff felt Rose grab his arm, her fingers digging into his flesh. "The symbols," she hissed. "If we don't reach them before she finishes, there won't be anything left of Red Rock by sunrise." A figure stepped out of the shadows. Josephine, the saloon owner's wife, who'd been so helpful when Luke first arrived in town. Her elegant dress was replaced by the same dark robes as the others, but her eyes held recognition as they met his. "Sheriff," she said, voice thick with something between regret and determination. Sheriff Luke Carter wiped the sweat from his brow as he crouched behind a stack of weathered mining crates, his hand steady on his Winchester. The abandoned Silver Peak mine loomed before him, its dark maw a testament to broken dreams and buried secrets. 3 days of tracking had led him here, where he believed Eleanor Hall was being held captive, and where he'd finally uncovered the truth about her father's murder and the disappeared former sheriff. Nathan Lopez stood at Luke's side, the Mexican-American deputy's eyes scanning the rocky ridge above for any sign of movement. They'd formed an unlikely alliance after Luke discovered Nathan had been secretly gathering evidence against Isaac Allen, the saloon owner whose opium empire stretched from Durango to Tucson. But Nathan had his own mission, finding his sister Rose, who'd vanished while working as a maid in Allen's establishment. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Through his brass spyglass, Luke counted 6 riders approaching the mine entrance. He recognized Isaac Allen's distinctive white coat and Joshua Nelson, the railroad executive whose land fraud scheme Eleanor had uncovered in her father's banking ledgers. The pieces were finally falling into place, revealing a conspiracy far darker than Luke had imagined. Inside the mine, Eleanor Hall sat bound but alert, her wrists raw from the ropes. The Harvard-educated banker's daughter had proven far more resourceful than her captors expected. She'd managed to work one hand partially free and had been slowly sawing through the remaining bonds with a rusty nail she'd found. More importantly, she'd overheard conversations that confirmed her suspicions about the railroad's stolen land deeds. The truth was more twisted than anyone had guessed. Joshua Nelson wasn't just stealing land. He was using the railroad's survey maps to identify gold deposits, then forcing sales through forged documents and threats. Isaac Allen's saloon empire was merely a front, laundering money from the mining operation. The former sheriff had discovered this, leading to his murder and disposal in an abandoned mine shaft. Luke and Nathan watched as Allen's men began unloading heavy crates from their pack horses. Through the mine's broken timbers, they could see flickering lamplight and hear the echo of voices. Caroline Lopez, Nathan's wife and the local schoolteacher, had provided crucial information about the mine's layout, having grown up in a mining family. There was only one main shaft, with 2 secondary tunnels that dead-ended. "We move now," Luke whispered, checking his revolver one final time. "Any longer and they'll have time to destroy evidence, or worse." He didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew Eleanor's chances of survival dropped with each passing minute. Nathan nodded grimly, threading a stick of dynamite through his belt. They'd need it to block the escape route through the back tunnel. The assault began with precision. Nathan circled wide to the mine's rear entrance, while Luke created a distraction, sending a cascade of loose rock down the slope. As Allen's men turned toward the noise, Luke caught a glimpse of Charlotte Carter, his sister who'd gone missing 3 months ago, emerging from the mine entrance. The sight nearly caused him to lose focus, but years of lawman training kept him steady. Inside the mine, Eleanor had managed to free herself just as the first shots rang out. She ducked behind a support beam as bullets splintered the wooden beams around her. Through the chaos, she spotted Joshua Nelson attempting to burn a stack of documents, the evidence she'd risked everything to expose. Without hesitation, she launched herself toward him, tackling the surprised executive to the ground. The firefight intensified as Luke worked his way into the mine, methodically neutralizing Allen's guards. Nathan's dynamite explosion sealed the back tunnel, trapping the conspirators inside. But Isaac Allen proved more dangerous than expected, producing a shotgun from behind a mining cart. The blast caught Luke in the shoulder, spinning him against the wall as return fire lit up the darkness. Charlotte Carter had been forced to work in Allen's operation after discovering their scheme, her medical knowledge used to tend injured miners. Now she grabbed a fallen pistol and joined the fight, her shot catching Allen in the leg as he tried to reach Eleanor and Nelson. The Saloon King stumbled, crashing into a support beam that sent a shower of rocks raining down. In the ensuing chaos, Joshua Nelson broke free from Eleanor's grasp and ran deeper into the mine. Luke, despite his wound, pursued him through the twisting tunnel. The railroad man's knowledge of the mine's layout proved useless when he took a wrong turn into a dead end. Cornered, he turned with a derringer, but Luke was faster. The echo of the fatal shot reverberated through the mountain. When the dust settled, Eleanor emerged clutching the salvaged documents while Charlotte tended to Luke's shoulder. Nathan secured the surviving conspirators, including a wounded Isaac Allen who spat curses in English and Spanish. But the former sheriff's body, discovered in a side shaft, told the final chapter of the story. Justice would come to Red Rock at last, though the price had been steep. The aftermath brought changes to Red Rock. Eleanor used her father's banking connections to help legitimate mining operations flourish. Charlotte's medical skills found better use in the new hospital, while Nathan and Caroline Lopez worked to establish a school for the miners' children. And Luke Carter remained as sheriff, knowing that some frontiers needed both justice and mercy to truly flourish. The summer rains came early to Red Rock that year, turning the mountain paths into treacherous ribbons of mud and loose shale. Luke Carter stood at his office window, watching sheets of water cascade from the newly constructed town hall's tin roof. The documents Eleanor had recovered from the mine had sparked investigations reaching as far as Durango, where railroad executives now faced federal prosecution. But something still nagged at the sheriff's instincts, loose ends that refused to be tied. Nathan's morning report confirmed his suspicions. 3 more Chinese workers had vanished from the rehabilitated mines, their belongings left untouched in the company quarters. The disappearances bore an unsettling similarity to the patterns that had emerged during their investigation of the banker's daughter's murder. Someone was rebuilding the old network, piece by bloody piece. Eleanor's banking reforms had brought legitimate business to Red Rock, but the town's shadows still harbored those who preferred the old ways. Charlotte had noticed an uptick in suspicious injuries at the hospital, burns and wounds that spoke of enforced silence and hidden violence. The opium trade might have been disrupted, but Luke knew from experience that such enterprises rarely died completely. Caroline Lopez's school project had revealed another disturbing pattern. Children of miners who had testified against Isaac Allen's organization were being subtly threatened. Notes appeared in lunch pails, whispered warnings in the schoolyard. Though Isaac remained imprisoned in Pueblo awaiting trial, his influence seemed to reach beyond the prison walls, suggesting a network far more extensive than they had initially uncovered. Luke's shoulder still ached in the damp weather, a reminder of the mine confrontation. But it was the memory of Josephine, the banker's daughter, that truly haunted him. Her murder had been blamed on random bandits, but the evidence they'd uncovered pointed to a calculated execution. She had stumbled upon something beyond the land fraud, something that made powerful men nervous enough to kill. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Rose, the new telegraph operator, clutched a rain-soaked message in her trembling hands. The words confirmed Luke's worst fears. Isaac Allen had escaped during a prisoner transfer, leaving 3 guards dead. More troubling were reports of him being seen heading toward Tucson with a group of riders, the same direction where several Red Rock witnesses had recently relocated. Charlotte arrived as Luke was saddling his horse, her medical bag already packed. "The hospital can spare me," she said, reading his protest before it formed. "Besides, you never did learn to properly dress a wound." The ghost of a smile crossed her face, but her eyes held the same determination he'd seen in the mine. They both knew this wasn't over. It had merely entered a new phase. Eleanor met them at the livery stable, leading her own mount. The banker's daughter had been her friend, and the darkness in her eyes spoke of personal vengeance as much as justice. Nathan appeared from the shadows, rifle already secured to his saddle. No words were needed. They had come too far together to separate now. As the group rode south through the driving rain, Luke reflected on how Red Rock had changed them all. They had come seeking different things: justice, redemption, a fresh start, but had found something stronger in their shared purpose. The town behind them was no longer the corrupt frontier outpost he'd first encountered, but neither was it fully cleansed. Some evils required persistent vigilance to truly defeat. The trail to Tucson would be long and dangerous, but Luke knew they had no choice. Isaac Allen's escape threatened everything they had built, and the disappearing workers suggested a cancer still growing in the shadows. As they rode into the gathering storm, Luke silently vowed to finish what Josephine's death had started. Red Rock's transformation had come at too high a price to allow the old darkness to return. Thunder rolled across the mountains as the riders disappeared into the rain-soaked night. Behind them, Red Rock's lights flickered like distant stars, a reminder of what they fought to protect. Ahead lay uncertainty and danger, but also the chance to finally excise the corruption that had taken root in these mountains. The frontier still needed its guardians, and Luke Carter had learned that true justice required both courage and sacrifice to prevail. The morning sun cast long shadows across Red Rock's dusty Main Street as Sheriff Luke Carter emerged from his office, adjusting the unfamiliar weight of his badge. His investigation into Carolyn Allen's murder and Sheriff Joshua Nelson's disappearance had led him deep into a web of corruption that stretched from the local saloon to the railroad offices in Durango. The evidence he'd pieced together pointed to an elaborate scheme orchestrated by Nathan Hall, the saloon owner who'd built his empire on opium and exploitation. Caroline's father, Isaac Allen, sat slumped at his desk in the bank when Luke entered. The banker's grief had transformed into quiet determination since Luke revealed that his daughter had discovered documents linking Hall's operation to fraudulent land deals with the railroad. She was trying to protect the miners, Isaac whispered, hands trembling as he passed Luke a leather portfolio. These are copies of everything she found. The papers detailed an intricate conspiracy. Hall and his railroad partners had been systematically forcing miners off their claims through forged deeds and inflated debts, then reselling the mineral-rich lands at massive profits. Caroline had traced the money through a series of shell companies back to Eleanor Lopez, Hall's mysterious business partner who ran high-stakes poker games in the saloon's back room. Luke's deputy, Caleb Nelson, brother of the missing sheriff, studied the mountain trails marked on Caroline's maps. Joshua was heading to these abandoned mines the night he disappeared, he said, pointing to a cluster of crosses near Pueblo Pass. He'd received an anonymous tip about opium shipments being moved through the old tunnels. Eleanor Lopez was seen riding in that direction the same evening. Rose Carter, the local schoolteacher who'd been helping Luke navigate Red Rock's complex social hierarchy, brought disturbing news from her students. Children of miners spoke of strange lights in the mountains at night, and their fathers whispered about armed men guarding the supposedly abandoned shafts. More troublingly, several families had vanished after refusing to sell their claims to Hall's associates. The breakthrough came from Charlotte Hall, Nathan's estranged wife, who'd been secretly gathering evidence of her husband's crimes. The old Martinez silver mine isn't abandoned at all, she revealed during a clandestine meeting behind the church. They're using Chinese laborers, prisoners really, to work the richest veins. The opium keeps them compliant. Joshua discovered it, and that's why they took him. Under cover of darkness, Luke led a small team including Caleb and several trusted miners through the treacherous mountain paths. They found Joshua Nelson alive but badly beaten, chained in a makeshift cell deep within the Martinez mine. The rescue operation quickly turned violent when Eleanor Lopez's men emerged from the shadows, guns blazing in the narrow tunnels. The ensuing firefight revealed the true scope of the operation. Beyond the opium storage and forced labor camp, they discovered a sophisticated counterfeiting operation producing perfect copies of railroad bonds and land deeds. Eleanor Lopez herself fell during the battle, but not before confessing that the scheme reached all the way to railroad executives in Wichita and Tucson. Nathan Hall attempted to flee Red Rock with a fortune in stolen bonds, only to find his escape route blocked by Josephine Lopez, Eleanor's daughter, who'd been working undercover as a saloon girl while gathering evidence for federal investigators. The look of betrayal on Hall's face when she revealed her true identity matched the satisfaction in her eyes as she snapped the handcuffs around his wrists. In the aftermath, the truth about Caroline Allen's murder finally emerged through Joshua Nelson's testimony. She'd confronted Eleanor Lopez with proof of the counterfeiting operation, unaware that Nathan Hall was listening from the next room. Her death had been meant to look like a robbery gone wrong, but Caroline's careful documentation ensured that justice would eventually prevail. The liberation of the imprisoned miners and the dismantling of the criminal enterprise transformed Red Rock. Isaac Allen established a fund using recovered money to help displaced families reclaim their lands. Joshua Nelson, though bearing permanent scars from his captivity, resumed his duties as sheriff, with Luke Carter remaining as his deputy and continuing his courtship of Rose, whose students now learned about honest mining instead of living in fear. The railroad executives implicated in the scheme faced federal prosecution, their trials in Tucson drawing national attention to the exploitation of Western territories. Charlotte Hall, finally free from her husband's shadow, used her portion of the recovered funds to establish a home for women escaping similar situations, while Josephine Lopez continued her work with the federal marshals, tracking down the remaining members of the counterfeiting ring. As winter settled over the mountains surrounding Red Rock, the town's transformation became evident in ways both subtle and profound. The saloon, once a den of corruption, reopened under Charlotte's management as a legitimate establishment where minors could enjoy honest entertainment and fair prices. The old opium dens were converted into reading rooms where Rose taught evening classes to adults, eager to improve their prospects in the changing frontier. Luke Carter's daily patrols now focused more on keeping peace between competing mining claims than chasing outlaws. He'd developed a reputation for fair-minded arbitration, often consulting with Isaac Allen on the legal intricacies of mineral rights. The banker's expertise proved invaluable as the town established proper documentation procedures for claim stakes, preventing the kind of exploitation that had nearly destroyed their community. In Pueblo, Caroline worked tirelessly with federal prosecutors, her meticulous records forming the backbone of cases against corrupt railroad officials. Her efforts led to the recovery of stolen lands as far away as Durango, where displaced families began returning to reclaim their homesteads. The sight of children playing in yards that had stood empty brought tears to her eyes, reminding her of why she'd risked everything to expose the truth. Joshua Nelson's physical recovery progressed slowly, but his spirit remained unbroken. He took pride in mentoring young deputies from neighboring towns, sharing hard-learned lessons about the importance of vigilance and integrity. The scars on his face became a symbol of the town's resilience, earning him respect from even the most hardened miners who passed through Red Rock. Eleanor's general store evolved into a community hub where newly arrived settlers could find not just supplies, but guidance and support. She partnered with Josephine to establish a network of safe houses between Red Rock and Wichita, providing refuge for those escaping exploitation in other frontier towns. Their efforts slowly began changing the character of the entire territory. As spring approached, Luke and Rose finally celebrated their wedding in the newly constructed church, built with lumber from the Reformed Mining Company's sustainable forestry operation. The ceremony brought together people from all walks of life: miners, merchants, ranchers, and even a few reformed outlaws who'd chosen to make honest lives in Red Rock. The couple's union symbolized the town's own redemption story. Nathan, the young Boston sheriff who'd started it all, occasionally sent letters from his new post in Tucson, where he continued working with federal authorities to root out corruption in other territories. His experiences in Red Rock had taught him that true justice required more than just a badge. It needed community support and unwavering dedication to the truth. The mountain peaks surrounding Red Rock still held their secrets, but the town below had found its moral compass. New veins of silver discovered in the properly regulated mines brought sustainable prosperity, while the railroad now served legitimate commerce instead of criminal enterprises. The bank, under Isaac's careful management, provided fair loans to small business owners and homesteaders alike. Caleb's former empire lay in ruins, its pieces repurposed for the greater good. The hidden tunnels that once smuggled opium now served as emergency exits for the mines, while his luxurious mansion became a school where Rose taught children to read and write. Even the corrupt legacy of his influence had been transformed into something positive, a cautionary tale that reminded everyone of the importance of staying vigilant against greed and exploitation. As summer approached, bringing with it new challenges and opportunities, Red Rock stood as a testament to the power of collective courage and determination. The town's story spread throughout the territory, inspiring other communities to confront their own shadows and work toward redemption. The frontier was changing, and Red Rock had become a beacon of hope for those who believed in the possibility of justice in the Wild West. The transformation of Red Rock continued through the changing seasons, but Luke knew better than to let his guard down. Though Caleb's immediate influence had been dismantled, the former sheriff's investigation into Charlotte's murder had revealed a web of corruption that stretched far beyond the town's borders, reaching into the highest echelons of the railroad companies that were rapidly reshaping the West. One crisp autumn morning, a telegram arrived from Durango bearing troubling news. Several former associates of Caleb had been spotted meeting with railroad executives in a private club, and whispers of retaliation against Red Rock had begun to circulate. Luke shared the intelligence with Nathan and Isaac, who had become his most trusted advisors in maintaining the town's hard-won peace. Rose's school had become a gathering place for more than just education. The former working girls who had found new purpose there began noticing strange men watching the building, taking notes on comings and goings. When Eleanor reported this to Luke, he recognized the methodical surveillance techniques he'd learned about during his time with the Boston Police Department.